I'll never forget the Thursday night when Emily bounced into our apartment, cheeks flushed with excitement, waving those pastel pink boarding passes like they were golden tickets. "Girls' weekend in Miami, babe. Just sun, mojitos, and spa robes," she chirped while scrolling through Pinterest boards for beach outfits. I grinned and played the supportive boyfriend, but there was a splinter of unease that wouldn't dislodge. Over the past few weeks, Emily's phone had become a fortress, face down on the couch, always silenced, a quick swipe up to close whatever app she'd been glued to whenever I walked in. I told myself I was overthinking, yet the anxiety hummed louder than the fridge at midnight. So, the night before her flight, while she was in the shower belting out Taylor Swift, I clipped an AirTag inside the lining of her away carry-on. I'd bought the tracker months earlier after a buddy's luggage fiasco at LAX, never imagining I'd use it like some bargain bin private eye. Friday morning, I watched her lift pull away, heart hiccuping with guilt and curiosity. At first, the Find My app behaved. Her plane vectored straight southeast. Hour later, the little dot blinked near Fort Lauderdale, then Miami Beach, exactly as promised. Relief washed over me, salty and sweet, until 9 p.m., when the dot flickered, vanished, then reappeared clear across the country, hovering over the blinking neon grid of Las Vegas Boulevard. My stomach fell through the floorboards. I refreshed like a madman, hoping for a glitch, but the signal steadied over the Cosmopolitan. Emily's Instagram stories still showed pink-filtered palm trees and frosty cocktails, posted just now. She was ghost-posting decoys. I blasted through a 5-minute debate with my conscience, booked the first red-eye out of Newark, and spent the flight gripping the armrests, rehearsing every outcome, from a comical misunderstanding to the kind of betrayal that splits your timeline into before and after. By sunrise, the Strip's flashing billboards were mocking me with 3-story promises of happiness. What happens here stays here. Not this time. I parked myself at a Starbucks across from the Cosmos lobby bar, hoodie up, AirTag live on my phone. The dot floated somewhere 30 floors above, and I felt like a sitcom burglar casing a joint. Morning blended into afternoon. Every time the elevator opened, my pulse spiked. Finally, just after 4, the doors slid apart and Emily stepped out, laughing with Nick Drummond, her supposedly barely know-him architect coworker. He wore linen like a movie star on Casual Friday, sunglasses still perched indoors. They kept an exact 2-inch gap between their elbows, the kind of choreographed distance people use when they're painfully aware of appearances. I trailed them to the rooftop pool bar, staying back with a magazine I never once flipped open. My phone's camera lens peeked through its case. I snapped bursts while they clinked glasses and shared sunscreen like newlyweds, his hand skimming the small of her back. When Emily disappeared toward the cabanas, Nick answered a call. I caught just enough. Yeah, she has no idea. Boss definitely can't find out. I stitched screenshots into a tidy folder labeled Insurance. Every image geotagged and timestamped. That night, I booked a room 2 floors below theirs and slid a note under Nick's door. "Let's talk before the wrong Dropbox link hits your firm's group chat. Suite 2714, 8 a.m. My heart pounded, as if I'd stapled the paper to my own chest. Sleep never came, but the adrenaline kept me sharper than espresso. At 8:02 a.m., Nick knocked, face drained of poolside bravado. I invited him in, blinds open to the sunrise slicing between high rises. I laid my phone on the table, thumbnails of him and Emily tiled like damning mosaics. "Relax," I said. "I'm not posting anything, yet. But you're engaged, right? To Carter Mason's daughter, the same Carter who signs your checks?" His pupils shrank. I slid a printed draft of an email across the glass. Every photo attached, CC'd to Carter Mason, Emily and Nick's fiancé. "Here's the deal," I continued. "I walk away with 0 drama and a tidy settlement that covers my attorney, new apartment, and, let's call it, emotional restitution. In return, this folder evaporates." He stared, calculating silence stretching until it snapped. "How much?" he whispered. I named a figure big enough to sting but small enough to feel like a bargain compared to losing his career and future marriage. We drafted a quick memorandum. Venmo wasn't going to cut it, so he wired half up front from his phone while I watched, the rest scheduled for Monday. I recorded the transaction, then stood. "We're done," I said. I left him pacing and rode downstairs just as Emily texted that her yoga class had run late and she'd call me tonight. I almost laughed at the audacity. Back in Jersey 3 days later, the wire had cleared. I retained Meredith Cole, a litigation shark whose business cards might as well be embossed with bite marks. Because Emily and I had bought the condo in my name, better credit score, she'd said, it would stay mine. When Emily walked through the door sunburned and humming, she found my suitcase packed, her belongings boxed in the hall, divorce papers atop the stack. She tried every angle. Denial, tears, rage. I said nothing, only handed her the neatly bound evidence so she'd know the fight was unwinnable. Word spread fast. Nick vanished from the firm's website within a week. Emily moved back with her parents in Ohio, and I leased the condo to cover my new mortgage on a place with twice the view. Some nights I replay the weekend, wondering if the tracker made me paranoid or merely illuminated what was already there. Either way, that dime-sized piece of tech saved me years of half-truths, and the payout turned heartbreak into a launchpad. I'm not proud of the extortion-adjacent maneuver, but YouTube commenters love poetic justice. When I posted the anonymized story to r/surviving infidelity, it shot to the front page. They call me petty. I call it breaking even, with interest. 2 months slipped by like cars on the turnpike, and the divorce decree ink was still drying when the first DM landed. Some podcast producer named Tyler T. Bird Lawson, offering a guest slot on his relationship drama show. I ignored him, but he wasn't the only one sniffing around. My Reddit post had migrated to TikTok voiceovers, then to YouTube essays with thumbnails of a woman in sunglasses and the word cheater stamped across her forehead in neon yellow. The views were insane. The comment sections a free-for-all of popcorn emojis and armchair legal advice. One Tuesday night, while reheating pad thai, I got a cease-and-desist email from a Los Angeles law firm representing Nick Drummond for defamatory online statements. I almost choked on a bean sprout. I reread the attachment twice, then replied with a 3-sentence answer attaching a zip file of all the photos, plus a friendly reminder that California recognizes truth as an absolute defense. Never heard back. Emily, on the other hand, couldn't stay silent. She called from her parents' landline. Small-town Ohio still clings to copper wire, voice trembling between fury and nostalgia. "You've ruined my life," she said. I stared at the ceiling fan, counting rotations. "I just turned on the lights, Em," I told her. She hung up. An hour later, her best friend, Jenna, texted a novel blaming me for cyberbullying. I screenshotted the tirade, saved it with the rest of the archive, and set my phone to Do Not Disturb. Late July in Jersey is an oven, so I spent weekends biking the Hudson River Greenway, letting humidity iron the kinks out of my thoughts. During one ride, I nearly collided with a jogger, Hazel Stewart, an old high school friend I hadn't seen since prom. We grabbed iced coffees, and conversation glided as effortlessly as if senior year had been yesterday. Hazel worked in nonprofit fundraising, had a black lab mix named Bosco, and spoke about trust like it was still something people did. Our catch-ups became a ritual. Tuesday jogs, Friday rooftop movies, Sunday farmers markets, where she taught me the difference between Honeycrisp and Pink Lady apples. I never meant for it to evolve, but life has a way of sprouting where the cracks are widest. By mid-August, Hazel was leaving a spare toothbrush in my bathroom drawer. That's when the packages started arriving. A bouquet of wilted roses addressed to homewrecker, slipped between Amazon boxes at my front door. A glossy printout of a photoshopped image, Hazel and me kissing under a caption that read "Serial Adulterer Number 2", was taped to the lobby mirror. My building's cameras caught a hooded figure, but the footage was too grainy. Hazel laughed it off, but I felt the old paranoia re-enter my bloodstream like ice water. I changed all my passwords, installed a ring system, and asked the doorman to log every visitor. Day later, I found an AirTag in the wheel well of my Subaru. Emily must have decided poetic justice cuts both ways. I bagged it, filed a police report, and my lawyer drafted a harassment warning. Meredith Cole could have recited restraining order statutes in her sleep. Within 48 hours, Emily received an official notice from a Jersey judge telling her to stay a minimum of 500 feet away from me, my home, and my social profiles. Meanwhile, Nick's life was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. An anonymous employee leaked that he'd funneled client design fees into a private slush fund for weekend getaways. Vegas wasn't the only detour. Carter Mason's legal team opened a forensic audit. Tabloids sniffed blood. I watched from a safe distance, equal parts vindicated and dizzy. One night around 1 a.m., Nick called me from a number I didn't recognize. His voice was a rasp. "She told them it was all my idea, man. I'm looking at embezzlement charges." I didn't answer, just let him talk until the silence became unbearable and he hung up. Fall rolled in with crisp mornings and storefront pumpkins. Hazel and I drove up to Sleepy Hollow for cider donuts and leaf peeping. Together we felt like two people who'd skipped half the plot but somehow landed on the same page. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living in a glass house, waiting for another stone. Therapist sessions on Wednesdays helped. Dr. Nguyen reminded me that distrust is a scar, not a tattoo. It fades if you give it the right care. I started journaling every night, listing 3 things I was grateful for that didn't involve revenge or schadenfreude. In October, my Reddit inbox pinged. A moderator for r/nuclear revenge invited me to share a longer version of the saga for Halloween. The comment karma would have been off the charts, but I declined. I'd weaponized the truth once. It didn't need an encore. Instead, Hazel and I carved pumpkins, roasted the seeds, and talked about adopting a second dog so Bosco wouldn't chew the couch when left alone. For the first time since the AirTag buzzed to life in Las Vegas, my pulse felt steady. Then, one chilly Saturday, I opened my mail to find a thick ivory envelope embossed with gold vines. Emily's handwriting scrawled my name along the front. Inside was a single photograph, her, Nick, and an ultrasound picture dated that week. On the back she'd written, "Whatever you took from me, you can't take this." My hands shook, not with envy, but with the realization that her cycle of possession had simply found a new host. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the tile cool under my palms, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Hazel called from the living room asking if I wanted extra cinnamon in the French toast batter. I looked at the photo once more, then fed it through the shredder, watching it confetti into nothing. Hazel yelled again, laughing at Bosco stealing bread off the counter, and I followed the sound of her voice down the hall, a place where echoes of betrayal finally felt distant enough to fade. Winter on the Hudson comes in stealth mode. One day the river's a steel blue mirror. The next it's dotted with ice floes that squeal against each other like sneakers on a gym floor. Hazel and I were walking Bosco along the promenade when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar Connecticut number. I let it go to voicemail, but the transcript popped up anyway. "This is Detective Alvarez with Stamford PD. We'd like to ask a few questions regarding Nicholas Drummond." My pulse stuttered even though I'd done nothing wrong. Hazel squeezed my gloved hand and mouthed, "You're okay." Back home I dialed the detective. Turns out Nick had been arrested for wire fraud after the audit unearthed a slush fund twice the size anyone guessed. My Vegas settlement sat right in the middle of the timeline. Alvarez reassured me I wasn't a target, they just needed context. But the call yanked open a door I'd hoped was sealed. That night, while Hazel graded grant proposals at the dining table, I printed every email, wire receipt, and text thread involving Nick and Emily, then walked 2 blocks to the precinct and handed over a folder fat enough to prop open a fire door. Walking back, the December air needled my cheeks, but I felt lighter than I had in months. I'd spent so long guarding the evidence that letting it go felt like dropping a backpack at the end of a hike. Christmas approached with peppermint-scented everything. Hazel's parents invited us to Vermont. I hesitated, afraid family gatherings might dig up my still-healing skepticism. But her dad greeted me with a bear hug and immediately enlisted me to help hang old-school glass ornaments. One evening, sipping hot cider by the fireplace, Hazel's mom asked, gentle as snowfall, how someone bounces back after the kind of betrayal I'd lived. I found myself answering without rehearsal, "You stop aiming for even, you start aiming for whole." The words surprised me, but they were true. On New Year's Eve, we took Bosco out just before midnight. The city skyline across the river glittered like someone had punched holes in a dark canvas and let the light leak through. Fireworks stuttered to life near Times Square, reflected in the patchy ice. Hazel rested her head on my shoulder. I pressed a kiss to her hair and realized that, somewhere between shredding Emily's ultrasound and handing over that evidence folder, I'd stopped replaying old footage in my head. The betrayal was still part of my story, but it wasn't the headline anymore. January court dates came and went. Nick pleaded out, avoiding prison, but surrendering his license and a chunk of future income. Rumor said he and Emily moved into a rented duplex near her parents. I received a terse legal notice confirming they wouldn't contact me again. It felt anticlimactic, like the last pop of a balloon after the party's over. One icy morning in February, Hazel and I found an envelope under my doormat, no postmark, just my name in neat block letters. Inside lay the AirTag I'd planted in Emily's suitcase, its battery long dead and a scrap of paper. Sometimes the tracker becomes the tracked. No signature. Hazel's eyebrows lifted. I laughed. A real, chest-deep laugh that startled the dog. Looks like she wanted the last word, I said, tossing the coin-sized device into the trash. But later, I dug it out, wiped it clean, and placed it in a drawer. Not as a trophy. More like a smoke detector with no battery. A reminder of what happens when you ignore the faintest whiff of fire. Spring teased its arrival with puddles and pale green buds. Hazel proposed, half joking, half serious, that we mark the anniversary of our near collision with a road trip instead of a ring. So we loaded Bosco, a tent, and a cooler into the Subaru, the wheel wells now tracker-free, and followed Route 66 as far as Oklahoma. We camped under skies so wide the constellations felt close enough to pluck like grapes. One night, lying on a blanket beside a crackling fire, Hazel asked if I ever missed the life I'd planned with Emily. The question hung between us, sparks swirling upward. I stared at Orion's belt and answered slowly, I miss who I thought I was in that life. Someone oblivious, content, because he never checked the locks. But that guy wasn't safe, he was just asleep. Hazel laced her fingers with mine. Wide awake suits you better, she said. By the time we steered back toward Jersey, roadside wildflowers were blooming in ditches, and Bosco's nose prints tattooed the rear windows. I pulled off at a rest stop near the Delaware Water Gap, scrolled through Reddit for the first time in weeks, and saw a new thread. Would you sabotage a cheater if it guaranteed closure? Thousands of comments debated morality, legality, karma. I typed a reply, deleted it, then pocketed my phone. The debate no longer felt like mine to win. We rolled into the city at dusk, headlights skating across asphalt still damp from afternoon rain. The condo rose ahead, same brick, same lobby where the hate mail once stuck to mirrors. But it looked different, like a stage set struck and rebuilt for a fresh production. Hazel carried the cooler while I unlocked the door. The place smelled faintly of basil and new paint. A contractor had just finished patching a crack near the ceiling, erasing the last visible scar from the old era. I slid open the balcony door, letting in spring air tinged with river salt, and realized the view had been waiting for me to catch up. Inside, Hazel rattled pans, Bosco's tail thumped, and traffic hummed below, a trio composing the kind of ordinary soundtrack I used to call boring. Now it sounded a lot like peace. I reached into the drawer, palmed the AirTag one final time, then set it on the balcony railing and flicked it into the dark water where ice had melted to mirror. No splash reached my ears, but the silence that followed felt louder than any fireworks show on the strip. I closed the door, locked it once, then locked it again. Not because I feared who might come in, but because I finally cared who was already here.